You're watching TVP World direct from Washington as the fallout from the 2024 US election continues. And joining me now is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, James Lindsey. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with Ukraine. Could Donald Trump end the war in 24 hours? And more importantly, do you think Donald Trump sees the end of the war in Ukraine as a concession of land?
Well, that is a complicated question. What I would say is that, yes, the United States president could force the issue. And the obvious way to do that is by ending U.S. support for Ukraine's fight against Russia. That would put Ukraine in a very difficult position. Will Donald Trump do that? We do not know. A lot of speculation. But I think what you really have to do is wait and see what it is that he does. I think he has made it clear that he is not a big fan of continuing U.S. support for Ukraine on the military front. He wants the Europeans to do more. There are questions about how fast the Europeans could go in doing more and what they could provide. But there's also a tough question that Donald Trump and his national security team will have to answer, and that is, what is the balance between what they're going to do or not do on Ukraine and how they wish to approach China? And I think among potential Trump advisors, there's a split. Some argue that what the United States should do is pivot and pivot quickly to Asia. In essence, say to Europe, Ukraine is now your problem, you take it. Other potential Trump advisors argue that that would be a mistake, that first what we have to do is demonstrate to Vladimir Putin, but also to Xi Jinping, that the United States has an interest in having an outcome in Ukraine that keeps Ukraine as a sovereign, viable country. How will it all work out? We're going to find out.
Does Europe have reason to be concerned about this Trump presidency?
Certainly. I think Europe has reason to be concerned for both issues of security and economics. Donald Trump has been very clear that he is skeptical about the value of NATO to the United States. He has long argued that Europeans don't spend enough on their defense. They need to spend more. We're now up to about 24 of the NATO members spending the promised 2% of gross domestic product on defense. But I think for Donald Trump, given what is happening in Ukraine, that number has to go higher. So he's going to be saying to countries in Europe, you have to spend more. And you can't rely on the U.S. security umbrella. You can't free ride on America. At the same time, he's going to go ahead and impose tariffs. Those tariffs are going to hurt European exporters. We've got a taste of it back in 2018, 2019, when he imposed tariffs on imports of aluminum and steel from a number of countries, including some of America's closest trading partners. Europeans retaliated. I would expect if Donald Trump adheres to his campaign promises, he's going to go bigger and bolder on tariffs, which means you're going to see an even more significant response coming out of the European Union.
Is it as simple as saying that a Donald Trump presidency is bad news for particularly Central Eastern Europe, the likes of Ukraine, but also Poland?
Well, I think there's a big question mark, because again, we know what it is that Donald Trump has promised, and we know what he has not committed to. So he famously refused to say whether or not it was in America's interest for Ukraine to win in its war. But we don't know exactly what it is that he will do. And so when we have uncertainty, you have a lot of speculation. And you can speculate in a way that paints a pretty dire outcome for countries in Central Europe. You can speculate in ways that suggest that good things are going to happen. I think sometimes you actually have to read to the end of the book to find out what happens.
Many call Donald Trump a transactional operator. Can that have strengths in the foreign policy space, or does it miss the nuance?
Well, first of all, I think it is quite accurate that Donald Trump is transactional in his orientation, and he's looking to make deals. Whether it works or doesn't work comes down to what one's idea of a good deal is. You can be transactional and get a great deal. You can be transactional and have your pockets picked. And so that's why I don't think you can answer it on a sort of purely hypothetical. You really need to know the details. I do think that the great risk to Trump's approach is that pursuing things purely in a transactional format can strain and potentially even break alliances. and partnerships with countries that have been developed over the years. And again, here you come down to the question of to what extent is America advantaged by the fact that it has so many allies, partners, and friends around the world. I think most American foreign policy people would argue that's America's great strength, their strength in numbers. But Donald Trump has, for a long time now, been very skeptical of what it is that friends, partners, and allies bring to the table. His claim, which he's been making for decades, is that America's friends, partners, and allies free ride on our security guarantee while stealing our jobs.
What does the future of world stability or foreign policy look like when you have an American president that is cozy with someone like Vladimir Putin, but not just Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping called him this week to congratulate him on his presidency. What does the world look like in an order that has those kinds of cozy relationships?
Well, we're going to find out. And I think one of the big unknowns at this point is to what extent Donald Trump's second presidency will look like his first presidency. And a lot of people who support Donald Trump made the argument that it'll be a continuation of his first term. But there's a mighty big difference between the second Trump presidency and the first one, and that is the people who will be around him. Donald Trump, when he first became president in January 2017, surrounded himself with a lot of establishment figures on foreign policy, people who fundamentally disagreed with his approach to world affairs. It was often referred to at the time as the axis of adults who were putting guardrails around a Trump presidency. This time, second presidency, we're not going to have those same type of Republican foreign policy traditionalists who are trying to hang on to a foreign policy as we witnessed for the past 80 years. So you have more of a potential for people to enable Donald Trump to act, and we'll see how that plays out. Again, it's really hard to have read or listened to all of what Trump said on the campaign trail and know exactly what it is that he intends to do, because mostly what he said in the campaign trail is, I will make things better. He hasn't actually laid out how he will do it. And the reality is he is going to face, as all presidents face, difficult challenges. They're going to require him to make trade-offs among things he values.
On tariffs, do you think Donald Trump will launch effectively a trade war with the world? Is that what he wants?
Yes. I fully take Donald Trump at his word that he intends to impose tariffs on the world, basically building a tariff wall around the United States, and have even more significant tariffs targeted against imports of goods from China to the United States. I think the question there again is, how fast does he roll this out? How far does he go? And here's where there may be a significant difference in a second Trump presidency from the first Trump presidency. In the first Trump presidency, Donald Trump talked about tariffs as a lever, as a bargaining chip. If you imposed tariffs, you then had a chip that you could use to negotiate a deal. And there was a lot of talk about doing better trade deals, getting deals with the Chinese. And the idea was to basically get better terms for American exporters. In the last year or so, when Donald Trump talks about tariffs, he's not talking about them in terms of getting a better deal. What he's talking about is their potential to force manufacturers to relocate production in the United States. And that's the sense he keeps talking about how great things were in the 1890s in the United States when we had very high tariffs. Now, I think if you ask most economists how that will work, they would argue that that will go very, very badly, in part because you're going to get retaliation. So again, we'll see how it is that the Trump administration rolls out what I anticipate will be very significant tariffs.
Why do you think the talk about tariffs and indeed Donald Trump's comments on the foreign policy world stage, why do you think they land so well with particularly Republican voters, but as we've seen, swing voters here in America? Do you get a sense that American voters have gone to the polls with foreign policy in mind, or has it been a case of looking at the domestic situation and voting purely on that basis?
Americans vote largely on domestic policy issues, largely on economic issues. It's quite clear in the polls that that's what drove the vote here in 2024. Even if economists can trot out lots of statistics about how robust the American economy is, and it's growing at nearly 3%. Indeed, it's at record highs in the stock market, record low unemployment. The reality is Americans think that the economy is not working for them. The general rule in American politics, and it held up in 2024, is that foreign policy seldom has any impact on the outcome of elections. But the flip side of that conventional wisdom is also true. The outcome of American presidential elections has an outsized impact on the course of U.S. foreign policy, and I think we're going to see that in 2025.
And that's this edition of World Talks here on TVP World, direct from Washington. Do stay with us. I'm Aaron Darman. Goodbye for now.